I looked down at the faces of my employees and repeated the year-end quota they had been given at the start of the year. We were close to meeting it, but there was a danger we would not get there. My salespeople stared at me as I began to pace about the front of the conference room as the secretaries and office girls waited to hear what I was going to do this year. They all knew that I was going to come up with some type of incentive to make sure quota was met. I had come up with incentives the 2 prior years, but I was unsure where to go with it this year. I knew I would have to come up with something to motivate them, but I was blanking on what it should be. At that moment, I could only think of threatening some of their jobs if we didn't meet the quota, but I feared that some of the employees would figure they were safe and try to sabotage those they disliked if they figured those people would be the ones on their way out. As I stared out the window, I caught my secretary, Joanna Coffey, crossing her legs out of the corner of my eye. She was a pretty girl who was only a year younger than me. She was sitting there pulling at the red, above-the-knee pencil skirt of the color combo dress that hugged her curvy figure. Her black tights contrasted nicely against the skirt and the white ponte top of the dress, which had cap sleeves and a square neckline. Despite my attraction, I knew better than to ever hit on her. I knew how quickly that could turn into a career-devastating sexual harassment charge. I could only look, but never touch Joanna, which was fine with both of us. She was engaged when I hired her and had long since married the talented mechanic that I liked to bring my car to when it needed work. I got enough thrill out of just seeing her dressed up nicely. It was one of the few thrills of my job. I loved looking at what the girls around me wore. I kept track of the intricate details of what they wore. I often fantasized about wearing clothes like them and, on not a few occasions, I went out and bought outfits that were similar. I liked spending time pretending I was Joanna or one of the office girls and even one of my saleswomen. The idea of being feminine was my main source of arousal for decades and had really become my old source over the last few years. I sometimes felt that some of the girls had to know, but none of them ever led me to believe they did besides Joanna. Joanna was my personal secretary. She scheduled my affairs with me and spent more time with me than any other employee at the office. While the other girls in the office support staff split their time doing work for the salespeople and human resources department, Joanna only did what I asked her to except when big company events required her to work alongside the rest of the support staff. Joanna was fond of making comments that made blush. She knew how to push my buttons and rarely restrained herself when we were alone. I can't count the number of times Joanna said I was girlish looking. She would compliment my long, straight blonde hair and tell me how much she wished her naturally curly hair could be that straight without the use of chemicals. My haircut prompted occasional jokes among my employees. I understood them and did not raise too much of a fuss about it given the fact that I conceded that being a 36-year-old male who shows up to work with long, low ponytails every day is a bit unorthodox for a businessman. I've had corporate higher-ups ask me about getting rid of it, but they've never pushed the issue since my division of the company frequently brings in more money than any other. Joanna also liked to take care to note that my face and body were girlish. I have a small narrow nose and light eyebrows that are on the thin side. My frame is also wiry and I am 5 feet 9 inches, tall for a girl, but not so abnormally so that it would prompt people to stare when I went out on Halloween en femme in the past. Joanna took no small pleasure from teasing me about every girlish detail of my appearance, which only served to excite me. I loved hearing about how girlish I was. I only wished I could be something more than that, but I knew that could never happen. Knowing that Joanna had mentioned the girlish elements of my appearance around the office in playful teasing way, I decided to see if anyone would like to see me en femme. I looked at Joanna and smirked as I said, "Some of you are of the opinion that I look kind of girlish." I heard snickering in the room at my words. I didn't call anyone on it before I continued, "Well, since I'm not above making an ass of myself to get my job done, I was thinking maybe if you all meet the quota I'll come in here looking as girly as I can." "What does that mean?" one of my salesmen asked, prompting more snickers. I smiled and said, "I come in dressed up like one of the girls." I heard a wave of laughter in the room. I saw the look on my saleswomen's faces. They were motivated by the idea. They wanted to see me come in and stumble around in heels and look like an idiot. Some of the men clearly liked the idea too. I could see them scouring their mind for backhanded compliments for my feminized appearance. Others seemed unimpressed with the proposed incentive. However, they were the same people who were unimpressed the prior 2 years since I could not offer them more money or time off as an incentive. It seemed like a clear majority were motivated by the idea of me making a fool of myself by coming in dressed up like a girl. Joanna then tilted her head to the side and asked, "When do you plan on doing this, Earl?" I was thinking for the Christmas party. If we meet the quota before the 23rd, I'll come in here dressed up in a skirt or dress or something. Or something? One of saleswomen asked. Yes, you better come in a skirt or a dress, Joanna added. I saw some of the other girls and some of the men nodding in agreement. They wanted me to suffer and figured they were going to humiliate me. While I'm sure that would be a natural reaction, I knew that the idea was turning me on. I nodded and said, "Okay, I will wear a skirt or a dress. I won't cop out and wear pants no matter how cold it is." I saw the nodding, smirking faces staring back at me. I smiled as I realized I had utilized the perfect incentive that year. Those that I could motivate had the incentive of watching their boss humiliate himself, while I had the incentive of making sure they got the opportunity to do so. After I got the quota incentive proposal out there, I tried not to think about what would happen if they met it. That was an exercise that was doomed to failure. I spent countless nights lying in bed imagining what I would wear around my coworkers as I walked around them freely dressed en femme. I imagined the comments that they would make, some nice, some mocking, but I was sure the latter would be kept in check by my status as their boss. I found myself frequently daydreaming about it at my desk and as I walked around the office. As my staff got closer to reaching the quota, the fantasy became more real to me. I couldn't wait for the day to come. Then the quota was met. I saw a few of my workers celebrate a little. I overheard a couple of my male employees laugh about how they couldn't wait to watch me degrade myself by dressing like a woman. I never understood why being a woman is viewed as such a downgrade in position by most men. I mean, women look better, smell better, dress better, and sound better than men. The feminine is art, the masculine is meh. My secretary then came over to me and said, "I can't wait for the 23rd. I nodded and said, "I'm glad you plan on enjoying watching me embarrassing myself, Joanna." Joanna shook her head as she replied, "You won't be embarrassing yourself. You might even make few girls here jealous." I shook my head at her as she winked and smiled before she turned and walked away from me. I smiled to myself for a moment as I hoped that she was right. I wanted to make the real girls jealous, but I knew I was not that good looking and could not hope to be. I went home that evening feeling elated as the fantasies in my head kept replaying in a continuous loop. I walked into my home and went into the second closet in my bedroom that I reserved for Bethany, my female alter ego. I kept all evidence of my cross-dressing in it. Every feminine shoe, piece of clothing and accessory was in that closet, as were various pictures of me en femme at Halloween parties and celebrations. I was excited about what I would wear to work that December 23rd. I threw open my bedroom closet doors and smiled as I stared into my closet. I looked through my dresses and skirts to come up with the best outfit I had for the holiday season. After parsing through my entire wardrobe, I took a step back from the closet and retreated to my bed. I sat down and began to think about what I should wear. I narrowed it down to 3 outfits in my head right away. The first was my green dress, which I would pair with my black tights and a white cardigan and my silver stiletto heels. The dress was a ponte dress with 3/4 sleeves, a sweetheart neckline and a folded bow detail the left waist. The cardigan was cashmere with an open cascade front. The shoes had a 4.5-inch high heel with a peep toe. The next outfit I thought about was pairing my red knit sweater with my white tights, red heels, black sash and a black skirt. The sweater was cable knit with a V-neck. I was always a fan of my A-line above the knee black skirt, and my red shoes were decorated with red flowers accents at the heel and had 3-inch high block heels. I felt the outfit was the most festive one I could come up with without going to the store to supplement my feminine wardrobe. The last outfit I consider was pairing my black knit dress with a pair of black leggings and wearing my 3-inch heeled, black, mined calf, leather boots. The form-fitting dress with a scoop neckline was my favorite one to wear around the house because it was the most comfortable thing I'd ever owned. I weighed the merits of each outfit in my head. I loved how each outfit looked, but I didn't want to give away that maybe there was a little more to my cross-dressing than a one-time thing. As that thought crossed my mind, I decided that I couldn't wear the first outfit because the dress and sweater were too expensive. While I had no worries about the men recognizing this, I was well aware that some of the girls who worked for me were very fashionable. I figured that some of them would surely recognize how expensive the dress and sweater were. Also, I knew more than a few of the girls would notice how easily I moved about in stiletto heels. I was sure that would be a giveaway that I had more practice in them than could reasonably be expected under the circumstances. After eliminating the first outfit, I thought about the next two. Neither outfit was so expensive that it would cast doubt on why I would buy them, and each had their own merit. I loved how both outfits looked on me. Neither outfit also struck me as too inapposite of what the girls in my office frequently wore. As I thought it over in my head though, I realized that the girls who wore leggings to work were all under 35. I frowned as I realized that I was too old to wear a knit dress and leggings outside of my home. With that thought in mind, I settled on wearing the second outfit. I woke up that December 23rd and felt as I did on the Christmas mornings of my childhood. I was filled with a sense of excitement about what the day would bring in a way that had been alien to me since I had turned 13. I walked into the kitchen of my one-floor ranch and made myself a quick breakfast consisting of nothing more than oatmeal and coffee, as I did every day to help keep my weight down. Once I finished eating, I stepped into my bathroom and took a quick shower. The shower took only about 10 minutes before I got out and went into my bedroom to get dressed. I went into one of the drawers I had built into my second closet and pulled out my black bra first. I put it down on my bed before I took out one of my pairs of white tights. I smiled as I thought about the fact that it would only be the second time in my life I had worn white tights outside of my house. The first time had been for a Halloween party where I went as Little Red Riding Hood while my then-girlfriend went as the Big Bad Wolf. She found the whole idea cute before she realized that I enjoyed dressing that way and was not just doing it to get some cheap laughs out of my friends. After I took hold of the tights, I went back over to my bed to put them on. I rolled them down and placed my feet into them before I gently worked them up my hairless legs, a fact that I hoped would go unnoticed given the opaqueness of the tights and my light hair color. Once I finished putting on my tights, I gently pushed my testicles up into my body before I pulled my penis between my legs. I smiled at the apparent smoothness of my crotch for a moment, as I always did. I rubbed the place where my member normally was and felt the familiar stiffening between my legs as my member poked at the nylon covering my rear. My hand pulled away from my crotch and took hold of the bra on my bed. I placed the bra around my chest and hooked the straps in the back before I went into my closet and took hold of my B-cup breast forms. While I contemplated using socks, I was sure that I would be able to convince any person that asked what I stuffed my bra with that I in fact did use socks. I was pretty sure they would have no way to know I was lying. I then went back into my closet and grabbed my red knit sweater. I pulled it over my head and looked into the full-length mirror that was situated between my Earl closet and Bethany closet. I love the way the sweater hugs my slender waist, which has a vaguely feminine shape to it, as well as the fake breasts that give me a true womanish appearance. As I gazed at my appearance in the mirror, I ran my fingers through my long blonde hair, which rested on my sweater-covered shoulders. Once I finished admiring myself in the mirror, I took hold of my black skirt. I stepped into it and pulled it up my legs and smiled at the above-the-knee hem. I stared into the mirror as I zipped up the back of the skirt and buttoned its rear fly. I smirked at myself for a moment before I took my makeup bag out of my closet. I then walked out of my bedroom and headed into the bathroom. I placed the bag down on the sink basin before I blow-dried my hair and brushed it out. When I finished with my hair, I began applying my makeup. I put on eyeliner, red lipstick, mascara, and a little rouge to help give myself a feminine appearance. I am lucky to have light hair, so I don't have any visible stubble when I shave my face. Consequently, I don't have to worry about beard cover-up makeup like some other cross-dressers I've met over the years. While I knew that my perfectly done makeup would draw some questions, I already had my explanation planned out in my head. I was going to tell everyone that my sister had done my makeup, hair, and picked out my outfit. Some of my employees had met her, and they knew that she was a very style-conscious woman with great skills when it came to applying cosmetics and styling hair. My sister was a year and a half older than me, and I've always looked up to her. We spent a lot of our childhood playing together. While she occasionally did some boy things with me like tossing around a football or baseball, we frequently spent our time playing Barbies, and I spent more than a few occasions as her personal life-sized Barbie. As she got older and began using makeup, she liked to use me as a doll to experiment with new looks. I've always blamed my sister for introducing me to cross-dressing, but we have remained close. She's been the only person who I've willingly told about my cross-dressing, and she's never once treated me like a freak because of it. I walked out of the bathroom and went back into my bedroom. I saw the time on the alarm clock and knew I had to finish getting ready quickly. I took hold of the black leather purse I had made up the day before. The purse contained some makeup, my wallet, keys, and an extra pair of tights. I had learned my lesson regarding the need for an extra pair of tights the hard way the first time I went out en femme for Halloween. Within the first hour I had a run and nothing to change into. It also didn't help that my hairless legs were exposed, which prompted more than few jokes at my expense. I put the purse straps on my shoulder and walked over to my closet and took out the pair of black, chunky heels I intended to wear. I carried them to the front door before I put the shoes and a black unisexual leather coat on and headed out into my garage for my first day en femme outside of my house that was not during the Halloween season. I got into my car and pressed the button to open the garage door. I pulled out of my driveway and off my block without having any of my neighbors see me. I was fully willing to tell them about the incentive program, but I would be more than happy to not have to explain myself to them. I drove to work without issue and parked in my reserved spot like I did every workday. I stepped out of the car and looked around the parking lot. There were a few people in the parking lot, but they were from other companies in the office building and did not pay much attention to me. Smiling at the fact that no one recognized me, I walked into the building and headed for the elevator. I got into the elevator with a few other people I had seen around the building from time to time but had never said more than a few words to. They all glanced at me, but no one said a thing. I was beaming as I got off the elevator, fully aware that none of them had either noticed I was a man en femme or bothered to bring it. I walked down the hallway to our office door and saw one of my saleswomen talking to our receptionist, Pam Robinson. Pam smirked as she saw me coming. She could tell from a distance who I was giving my hair color and frame. I walked through the door and saw her shaking her head with a smile on her face. Cindy Stevens, the saleswoman standing in front of her, turned around and looked at me inquisitively. I could see she was trying to place my face before she began to laugh. "So what do you girls think?" I asked with a smile as I took off my coat and put it over one of my arms as my pocketbook hung from the other shoulder. "You look so cute," Cindy said before laughing. She wrapped her arms around me and gave me a hug before I felt her hands rub my bra straps through my sweater. Cindy paused and smirked at me before she took a step back as she continued laughing. Pam smiled and said, "You look good." I smirked at her as she somehow managed to keep her composure, unlike Cindy. I managed to respond, "Thanks," without laughing about the situation. I knew that I was going to be the butt of some jokes and would endure more than a few snickers, but those two girls were making it really fun for me at that moment. Cindy's laughter got a few employees to walk away from their workstations. They were interested in what was going on. I smiled as some of my male and female employees came out to greet me. I heard a few faux compliments from the guys as they snickered about my feminized appearance with one another. Sure enough, one of the girls came over to me and asked about my makeup and clothes, so I explained how my sister had made me over. They all bought my lie. None of them were surprised by it, especially those that had met her. My sister was very outgoing, creative, and a little off the wall, and the employees that had met her spread that around as they discussed my appearance. I began to walk past the crowd of employees that had come to meet me when a number of my workers filed in through the front door. I was trapped amongst them as the whole process repeated itself. I heard the light mockery from the men and some of the girls, as well as compliments from some of the girls for my sister's good fashion sense and makeup skills. I smiled at those compliments as I knew they were really complimenting me without knowing it. One of the girls then asked what my name was. I looked at them strangely and asked, "My name?" "We can't call you Earl," Cindy answered. "She's a Pearl," Thomas, one of the oldest workers at the company, added. "Pearl? Why Pearl?" Pam asked. "Earl the Pearl," Thomas replied. "What?" Pam asked again. Thomas threw up his hands and started walking away while muttering something beneath his breath as a group of employees that had come in a little late walked over to get a good look at me. "Earl's calling himself Pearl," one of the men asked. I went to respond that I had not told anyone to call me Pearl, but Pam answered, "Apparently that's what he has to be called. It's a fine enough name." I didn't like the name Pearl. I felt it was too old-fashioned. It was the same reason I didn't like my real name. Well, that and the many nicknames I had been tagged with as a child. Earl the Toilet Swirl, Earl the Squirrel, Earls and Curls, and, the one I actually liked, Earl the Girl. Joanna was among those that came in a little late and saw me en femme as those around me talked about my appearance. Joanna was strangely quiet as she looked me over. She just smiled and walked away after saying hello. I walked behind her towards my office door when a couple of the girls stopped me from walking through it. Joanna and I looked at them strangely before Pam said, "A couple of the girls and I were talking, and we thought it would be cute if you spent the day working at Joanna's desk." "What about me?" Joanna said. Pam responded, "You can work at his. You look more like a boss than Pearl today anyway, sweetie." I gave Pam a glare for a brief second before Cindy added, "She didn't mean anything by it, she's just..." I cut Cindy off and said, "I didn't take any offense to it." Pam smiled at me before Dawn McInnes, our office manager, chimed in, "You've gone this far, what's it going to hurt to spend a day working outside of your office?" I shrugged and said, "I don't know, it's a bit..." "Don't think you could handle it," Pam replied with a smile. Since all of our files were on the system, any worker could work from any desk and do what they had to do on the computer system. I threw up my hands and took a seat at Joanna's desk, prompting laughter from some quarters. Joanna immediately took a photograph of me sitting at her desk with her cell phone. I looked at her strangely and Joanna explained, "I needed a new picture of you for my cell phone called ID." I smiled and shook my head before I finally got started working that morning. I did my normal work at Joanna's desk without much issue. Shortly after I started sitting at Joanna's desk, I realized that I was getting an opportunity to gain a new perspective to view the office from. As I worked, I overheard many more conversations than usual and smiled when I heard people talk about me as they forgot I was sitting outside my office door. Some of the people would walk by the desk and smile or smirk at me. I caught a few of them, but it did not bother me. I was very happy at that moment to be sitting in Joanna's desk while dressed in a skirt, heels, and tights. I felt that I looked the way I wanted to for the first time in the office and got excited as I daydreamed about someone I didn't know coming into the office and seeing me at the desk and just assuming I was Joanna's secretary. I felt my members stiffen as the fantasy played out in my head for a few minutes. The person would ask to see the boss, and I would have to play along with it with Joanna. I would fetch the stranger a cup of coffee at Joanna's order with a fake smile plastered on my face. The fantasy quickly dissipated though, as I knew the odds were extremely slim of something like that happening. New clients virtually never walked into our doors and bothered to ask to see me. They just wanted to see the salespeople and what type of deals they could get for them. About 2 hours after I started working, Joanna called out to me, "Pearl, can you come into my office for a moment?" I rolled my eyes and smiled as I got to my feet while I felt a feeling of desire as I thought about how she phrased her question. I walked into the office and saw Joanna sitting at my desk. Her high heels were dangling from her feet, which were resting over my desk. She smirked at me and I felt a familiar surge of pleasure as I felt my member growing with arousal as I looked her over. I looked more like a secretary than she did as she sat at my desk in a pinstriped pantsuit with her dark hair that conveyed more authority and seriousness than my light hair could ever manage. "Please close the door, Pearl." I shrugged and closed the door before she asked me to take a seat. I took a seat in the guest chair I had never once sat in and that Joanna had sat in too many times to count. I found that the seat was surprisingly uncomfortable. Joanna smiled at me and said, "You look more comfortable in those clothes than you do in that seat." "It's an uncomfortable seat," I replied. Joanna laughed and nodded before she said, "You really look like a girl." "Thanks, I guess," I replied. Joanna tilted her head towards me and said, "Thanks? You guess? Wow, when you tell most guys they look like a girl, they don't answer like that." "You should know I'm not most guys," I retorted. Joanna laughed and nodded before she responded, "No, most guys are not nearly as pretty as you." "You think I'm pretty," I responded quickly with a smile. Joanna laughed once more at my response and said, "I always thought you had feminine features, I just never realized how overtly feminine they were. You look like you were born a girl." I blushed and shrugged as I replied, "I don't know about that." "Well, that's my opinion, just like it's my opinion that I'm sure this isn't the first time you've done this." I blushed again before Joanna smiled and said, "I knew it." "Keep it down," I replied. "I'm not going to tell anyone, Pearl, Earl." "Wait, what do you like to be called when you're dressed like this?" "You've got it all wrong," I lied before continuing. "My sister used to dress me up when we were kids. She was older than me and stronger than me until I was 12, so I spent some time as a child being her doll." Joanna laughed. She knew my sister well enough to know that what I was saying about her was true. I smiled as I realized that Joanna believed my lies about the nature of my past cross-dressing. I had made it all seem part of a distant past and that my sister was always behind my feminization. Shortly thereafter, Joanna dismissed me from her office so she could get back to work making last-second plans for our late afternoon office Christmas party. I sat back down at her desk and got back to work and felt the familiar rush I felt as I sat at a secretary's desk. At lunchtime, I ordered a salad from the office building's basement cafeteria. Dawn brought it up for me when she went to get her own lunch. After I finished eating, I started working again without thinking too much about where I was or how I was dressed until I saw Pam, Dawn, and the two office girls keep walking by my desk as they went about getting certain things for the office Christmas party in our conference room. Usually Joanna helped them, but she was a bit preoccupied talking to one of our distributors for me, so I got to my feet and asked Dawn, "Can I help out?" Dawn froze as she heard my words. She stared at me blankly as if she was trying to make sense of my simple question. After a few uncomfortable moments of silence, she replied, "Sure, you're dressed for the part. You may as well help out." Pam overheard her and laughed a little, prompting me to blush, which only made Pam laugh harder. She apologized, but I told her she had nothing to apologize about. I walked behind Dawn to the conference room. I saw that the room was already largely decorated and the girls were setting up the table and the Secret Santa gifts. Dawn asked me to help move the conference room table to the wall so we could use it as serving station. Seeing as I was the strongest person in the room, it was a reasonable request in my opinion. I quickly realized how difficult it was for the girls to move the big stuff. While I was used to walking in heels, I had never really picked up anything heavy while wearing them. In my fantasies, the ideas of doing so were unladylike even though I was well aware that my secretaries had moved furniture around the office before. As I moved the table, I almost lost my balance as felt the even greater than normal pressure on the heels and balls of my feet. I breathed a sigh as of relief as I placed the table down against the wall. Pam then came over to cover the table with a red vinyl tablecloth. We spread it out and placed it over tabletop. As we finished, I saw the office girls coming in with trays, so I went to where we stored them and helped them carry the rest of them in and set up the sternos for the food that Joanna and Dawn had ordered for the party. Joanna walked into the room and laughed as she saw me lighting a sterno. She looked at Dawn and asked, "Do you need any help?" Dawn smirked and glanced at me before she said, "No, we've got your replacement in here. She's doing great." Joanna smiled at me and said, "Oh, well, keep up the good work then, Pearl." I shook my head at her while Pam giggled and the office girls smirked at each other. Pam then walked out of the conference room as the delivery men entered the building. She paid the bill with the company credit card before we all walked out of the conference room to carry the trays of food back to the table. With the trays set up, I then started putting out the plastic knives, forks and plates on the table while Dawn started setting up the drinks. It was mostly non-alcoholic beverages consisting of soda, juice and water, but a couple of the guys and I always set out some wine and scotch at the parties. The conference room was mostly set up when Dawn called over to me and said, "Pearl, you're taller, go help Pam hang the mistletoe over the doorway." I stared at her for a moment before Dawn realized that she had ordered me to help Pam rather than ask. Dawn put her head down and said, "I'm so sorry, Pearl. I know you're..." I cut her apology off right there and said, "Don't worry about it. Haven't you heard the clothes make the man, Dawn? You're looking at me, and since I'm not dressed in my typical suit and tie, you're not seeing Earl Potvin. It doesn't help that you look so much like a girl either," Pam added. I laughed at her as I felt myself starting to get excited. Nothing ever excites me more than being told how girly I am. I only wish that it could be most of who I am or all of it, but I know that will never come to pass. After I helped Pam hang the mistletoe, I went back to my desk to try to finish some things up before the party started. I was largely successful in doing so, but I had a few loose ends hanging around as I walked to the conference room. I joined my employees who were filing into the conference room to get something to eat and drink. I saw a group of my salesmen talking about a recent football game and decided to join in. I interjected when one of the guys mentioned the hit one defensive linebacker put on the quarterback and noted the late hit the other team put on the quarterback in retaliation. He nodded and then the guys put my comment completely to the side. I was a bit surprised by that. Usually when I brought up something about sports with the guys, we talked about it, but it seemed that my feminine appearance made my commentary about sports less welcome. I seemed almost as if they were patronizing me about it. I walked away from them and grabbed some food and started to eat in the corner. Joanna came over to me, and we started to talk about our day before Pam and Cindy came over and asked me if I knew where my sister got my outfit. I knew where the clothes were from, so I told them. They were a bit surprised that my sister shopped at such an expensive retailer for me. I instantly regretted telling them and realized I should have lied and mentioned some inexpensive place where it would not seem so odd to purchase an outfit I'd only be expected to wear once. I deflected any further inquiry by complimenting Cindy's mauve-colored dress. She smiled and happily took the compliment. Another saleswoman then came over and started to talk with us as well before Dawn pulled me away from the group to ask me to help her hand out the Secret Santa gifts. I smiled and walked towards the small fake tree we had and started to hand out of the gifts. I called out the names of the recipients as usual. Everyone took their gifts and opened them before I opened the one given to me. I opened the box and saw a frame containing a Polaroid picture of me sitting at Joanna's desk in my outfit. While I saw Joanna take a picture of me with her phone, I hadn't seen anyone take one with a camera. I looked around and saw Joanna smiling sheepishly at me. I shook my head and smiled at her as I put the picture back into the box and wondered who had snapped the picture for her. The party came to an end and everyone headed home for the evening. As usual, I was the last one left in the office. I strolled into my office to just get a few things wrapped up before the holiday. I sat down at my desk and felt oddly out of place. I almost felt as if I didn't belong there. I laughed about it as I called myself crazy for feeling like I should be doing my work at my secretary's desk just because I was wearing a skirt. I know better than to think that girls don't have their own offices. I've had female employees with their own offices. I just somehow felt they were different from me in addition to the obvious chromosomal difference. I peered out of my office door and caught a glimpse of Joanna's desk inside. I knew it would be a real stretch to find a reason to get behind it in a skirt again.